Dear students, welcome to the lecture series on geography. In today's episode, we are discussing about the topic geography of communities. In nature, different kinds of organisms grow in association with each other. A group of several species living together with mutual adjustment and beneficial interactions in a natural area, and this area is known as a community. So, in this session, the topic can be studied under the following captions: meaning of community, characteristics of communities, community dynamics and succession, types of communities, and aquatic communities. Coming to meaning of community. The community refers to all the populations in a specific area or region at a certain time. The structure of a community involves many types of interactions among species. Some of these involve the gain and use of food, space, or other environmental resources. Others involve nutrient cycling through all members of the community and mutual regulation of population sizes. A community is an assemblage of organisms whose composition and aspect is determined by the properties of the environment and by the relations of the organisms to each other. A community that has a high diversity is more complex and stable than a community that has low diversity. This theory is originated on the observation that the food webs of communities of high diversity are more interconnected. Greater interconnectivity causes these systems to be more elastic to disturbances. If a species is removed, those species that relied on it for food have the option to switch to many other species that occupy a similar role in that ecosystem. In a low diversity ecosystem, possible substitutes for food may be non-existent or limited in abundance. Like an ecosystem, the size or area occupied by a community can vary considerably. Bounded by the distribution of the component species populations where these overlap, communities produce a uniform species composition. The definition of a community can be depend on a large number of factors. It can be broken down for easier understanding. In simplest terms, a community is an assemblage of populations living in the same place at the same time, interacting with each other and their environment. According to this definition, there are also various spatial scales that are recognized when describing different types of communities. Spatial scale refers to the size of the organisms that make up the community and can range from very small, that is bacteria, to very large, that is animals. Examples of different spatial scales in communities. A forest, it is made up of trees, plants and animals. A single tree, made up of a community of insects and flora. Or a termite gut, it is made up of a community of protozoa, bacteria and archaea. Now, we shall move on to the characteristics of communities. Communities are complex entities that can be characterized by their structure and dynamics. Species diversity. Each community is made up of much different organisms, plants, animals, microbes which differ taxonomically from each other. The number of species and population abundance in community also vary greatly. The study of species diversity is an essential component of community study. Growth form and structure. The type of community is described by major categories of growth forms, example tree shrubs, herbs, mosses, etc. These different growth forms determine the zonation and stratification of the community. Coming to dominance. Among several species present in a community, a few exert a major controlling influence by virtue of their size, numbers or activities. These are called as dominant species. Succession. Each community has its own developmental history which develops as a result of a directional change in it with time. Coming to trophic structure. Nutritionally, in each community, a group of autotrophic plants as well as heterotrophic animals exist as a self-sufficient, perfectly balanced assemblage of organisms. Coming to community composition. The communities may be large or small. Larger one extends over areas of several thousands of square kilometers as forest. Others such as deserts are comparatively smaller, and still others such as meadows, ponds, rivers, etc. covering a very restricted area. Very small sized communities are the groups of microorganisms in such microhabits as leaf surface, fallen log, litter, soil, etc. The number of species and population abundance in communities vary greatly. Among several species present in a community, a few exert a major controlling influence on the growth of the other species of community. These are called as ecological dominants or dominant species. There are three main types of species that serve as the basis for a community. These include the foundation species, keystone species and invasive species. Each of these has a specific role in how communities are formed. Coming to foundation species. Foundation species are considered the base of a community, having the greatest influence on its overall structure. They are usually the primary producers, organisms that bring most of the energy into the community. For example, kelp, a brown algae, is a foundation species that forms the basis of a kelp forest off the coast of California. The foundation species may physically modify the environment to produce and maintain habitats that benefit the other organisms. An example is the photosynthetic corals of the coral reef. Corals themselves are not photosynthetic, but harbor symbionts within their body tissues that perform photosynthesis. This is another example of a mutualism. Keystone species. A keystone species is a species that plays a critical role in maintaining the structure of an ecological community and whose impact on the community is greater than expected based on its relative abundance or total biomass. A keystone species is one whose presence is solution to maintaining biodiversity within an ecosystem and to maintaining a community structure. For example, the intertidal sea star is a keystone species. When this organism is removed from the community's populations of their natural prey, that is mussels, increases. This results in the complete alteration of the species composition and reducing biodiversity. Next is invasive species. The invasive species are foreign species. Invasive species are often better competitors than native species, resulting in population explosions. These new species usually overtake the native populations, driving them to localized extinctions. The introduction of invasive species can cause harm to the economy and to the environment. Coming to community dynamics and succession. The communities are never stable but dynamic, changing more or less regularly over time and space. The occurrence of relatively definite sequence of communities over a period of time in the same area is known as ecological succession. Community dynamics are the changes in community structure and composition over time. Sometimes these changes are induced by environmental disturbances such as volcanoes, earthquakes, storms, fires, and climate change. Communities with a stable structure are said to be at equilibrium. Succession describes the sequential appearance and disappearance of species in the community over time. In primary succession, newly exposed or newly formed land is colonized by living things. In secondary succession, part of an ecosystem is disturbed, but leftovers of the previous community remain. Primary succession and pioneer species. Primary succession occurs when new land is formed. For example, the consequences after the eruption of volcanoes. As lava flows into the ocean, new land is continually being formed. First, withering and other natural forces break down the substrate enough for the establishment of certain plants and lichens with few soil requirements, known as pioneer species. These species help to further break down the mineral-rich lava into soil where other less hardy species will grow and eventually replacing the pioneer species. In addition, as these early species grow and die, they add to an ever-growing layer of decomposing organic material contributing to soil formation. Over time, the area will reach an equilibrium state with a set of organisms quite different from the pioneer species. Secondary succession. A typical example for secondary succession can be seen in oak and hickory forest that are cleared by wildfire. Wildfires will burn most vegetation and kill those animals unable to escape the fire. Their nutrients, however, are returned to the ground in the form of ash. Thus, even when areas are devoid of life due to severe fires, they will soon be ready for new life to start there. Before a wildfire, vegetation is often dominated by tall trees with access to the major plant energy resource, that is sunlight. Their height gives them access to sunlight while also shading the ground and other low-lying species. After the fire, these trees are no longer dominant. Thus, the first plants to grow back are usually annual plants, followed within a few years by quickly growing and spreading grasses along with other pioneer species. Due to changes in the environment brought on by the growth of the grasses and other species, over many years, shrubs will emerge along with small pine, oak and hickory trees. These organisms are called intermediate species. Ultimately, after a few years, the forest will reach its equilibrium point where species composition is no longer changing and resembles the community before the fire. This equilibrium state is referred to as the climax community, which will remain stable until the next disturbance. Coming to types of communities. There are two basic types of communities. One is terrestrial community, that is land, and another is aquatic community, means water. A biome is a community on a global scale and is usually defined by temperature, precipitation and by the types of plants and animals that inhabit there. These two basic types of community contain several biomes within. In terrestrial community, different biomes can be seen. They are tundra, grassland, desert, taiga, temperate forest and tropical forest. In aquatic communities, two types of biomes are found, marine and freshwater biomes. Terrestrial biomes. First one is tropical rainforest. Tropical rainforests occur in regions near the equator. The climate is always warm with plenty of rainfall. The rainforest is probably the richest biome both in diversity and in total biomass. The tropical rainforest has a complex structure with many levels of life. More than half of all terrestrial species live in this biome. Though some animals live on the ground, most rainforest animals live in the trees. Many of these animals spend their entire life in the forest canopy. Insects are so abundant in tropical rainforest that the majority have not yet been identified. With its year-long growing season, tropical forests have a rapid cycling of nutrients. Soils in tropical rainforest tend to have very little organic matter since most of the organic carbon is tied up in the standing biomass of the plants. These tropical laterite soils make poor agricultural soils after the forest has been cleared. Next is temperate forest. The temperate forest biome occurs south of the taiga in eastern North America, Eastern Asia and much of Europe. Rainfall is abundant and there is a well-defined growing season of between 140 and 300 days. The eastern United States and Canada are covered by this kind of natural vegetation. Dominant plants include beech, maple, oak and other deciduous hardwood trees. Trees of a deciduous forest have broad leaves. Sufficient sunlight penetrates the canopy to support a well-developed mass composed of shrubs, a layer of herbaceous plants and then often a ground covers of mosses and ferns. This stratification beneath the canopy provides a numerous habitats for a variety of insects and birds. The deciduous forest also contains many members of the rodent family which serve as a food source for bobcats, wolves and foxes. Winters are not as cold as in the taiga, so many amphibian and reptiles are able to survive. Coming to shrubland. The shrubland biome is dominated by shrubs with small but thick evergreen leaves that are often coated with a thick waxy cuticle and with thick underground stems that survive the dry summers and frequent fires. Shrublands occurs in parts of South America, Western Australia, Central Chile and around the Mediterranean Sea. Dense shrubland in California where the summers are hot and very dry is known as chaparral. This Mediterranean type shrubland lacks an understory and ground litter and is also highly flammable. Next is grassland biome. Grassland occurs in temperate and tropical areas with reduced rainfall or prolonged dry seasons. Grasslands occur in the America, Africa, Asia and Australia. Soils in this region are deep and rich and are excellent for agriculture. Grasslands are almost entirely devoid of trees and can support large group of livestock. Temperate grasslands include the Russian steppes, the South American pampas and North American prairies. A tall grass prairie occurs where moisture is not quite sufficient to support trees. A short grass prairies survives on less moisture and occurs between a tall grass prairie and deserts. Coming to tundra and desert biome. The tundra and desert biomes occupy the most extreme environments with little or no moisture and extremes of temperature, acting as harsh selective agents on organisms that occupy these areas. These two biomes have the fewest numbers of species due to the tough environmental conditions. The tundra covers the northernmost regions of North America and Eurasia, about 20% of the Earth's land area. This biome receives about 20 cm of rainfall annually. Snow melt makes water plentiful during summer months. Winters are long and dark, followed by very short summers. Deserts are characterized by dry conditions and a wide temperature range. The dry air leads to wide daily temperature fluctuations from freezing at night to over 120 degrees during the day. Most of the deserts occur at latitudes of 30 degrees north or south where descending air masses are dry. Next is taiga. The taiga is a coniferous forest extending across most of the northern area of northern Eurasia and North America. The taiga receives between 10 and 40 inches of rain per year and has a short growing season. Winters are cold and short, while summers tend to be cool. The taiga is noted for its great stands of spruce, fir, hemlock and pine. These trees have thick protective leaves and bark as well as needle-like leaves can withstand the weight of the accumulated snow. Now, we shall move on to aquatic communities. Clear-cut biome distinctions in water like those on land are difficult to make. The dissolved nutrients control many local aquatic distributions. There are three types of aquatic communities that occur in nature. They are marine, freshwater and estuaries. The marine biome. Even though covering 71% of the Earth's surface, oceans are vast aquatic deserts containing few nutrients and very little life. The marine biome contains more dissolved minerals than the freshwater biome. There are two basic categories to this biome, benthic and pelagic. Benthic communities are subdivided by depth, the shore or shelf and deep sea. Pelagic communities include planktonic and nectonic organisms. The upper 200 meters of the water column is the euphotic zone to which light can penetrate. Coastal communities. Estuaries are bays where rivers empty into the sea. Estuaries have high production for organisms that can tolerate changing salinity. Estuaries are called nurseries of the sea because many young marine fish develop in this protected environment before moving as adults into the wild open seas. Seashores. Rocky shorelines offer anchorage for sessile organisms. Seaweeds are main photosynthesizers. Oysters and mussels attach themselves by threads. Limpets and periwinkles either hide in crevices or fasten flat to rocks. Coral reefs. Areas of biological abundance in shallow, warm tropical waters. Stony corals have calcium carbonate exoskeleton and may include algae. Most form colonies may associate with zooxanthellae dinoflagellates. Reef is densely populated with animal life. Coming to oceans. Oceans cover about 3/4 of the Earth's surface. Oceanic organisms are placed in either pelagic or benthic categories. Pelagic division is divided into neritic and 3 levels of pelagic provinces. Neritic province has greater concentration of organisms because sunlight penetrates and nutrients are found here. Epipelagic zone has much photosynthetic phytoplankton that support zooplankton. Mesopelagic zone is semi-dark and contains carnivores. Adopted organisms tend to be translucent, red colored or luminescent. For example, shrimps, squids, lantern and hatchet fishes. The bathypelagic zone is completely dark and largest in size. It has strange looking fish. Benthic division includes organisms on continental shelf, continental slope and the abyssal plain. Sublittoral zone harbors seaweed that becomes thin where deeper. Most depend on slow rain of plankton and detritus from sunlight water above. Bathyal zone continues with thinning of sublittoral organisms. Abyssal zone contains animals at soil water interface of dark abyssal plain. In spite of high pressure, darkness and coldness, many invertebrates thrive here among sea urchins and tube worms. Coming to the freshwater biome. The freshwater biome is subdivided into two zones, running waters and standing waters. Larger bodies of freshwater are less prone to stratification. The upper layers have abundant oxygen, the lowermost layers are oxygen poor. Mixing between upper and lower layers in a pond or lake occurs during seasonal changes known as spring and fall overturn. Lakes are larger than ponds and are stratified in summer and winter. The epilimnon is the upper surface layer. It is warm in summer. The hypolimnon is the colder lower layer. A sudden drop in temperature occurs at the middle of the thermocline. Layering prevents mixing between the lower hypolimnon and the upper epilimnon. So finally, coming to the conclusion. The community concept emphasizes the idea that organisms live together in an orderly manner, that species distribution are more than simply individuals responding in a similar way to a particular set of physical factors. And of course, a community has properties or characteristics that are more than the sum of its species populations and unique attributes. Thank you.